Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Jonathan Weiss. I'm a clinical psychologist and researcher here at York University, and I hold a research chair in autism spectrum disorders treatment and care research. That means that all of my research and most of my clinical practice is focused on helping people with autism live happy and healthy lives. I want to teach you about autism today by sharing with you a story about my walks with Michael. So this is a story about how I got involved in the field of autism as a psychologist. Here's me as an undergraduate student looking for a job that worked nights and weekends, something that was interesting, and there was a group home, a place where people with disabilities lived in my community. And there was a young man named Michael who had severe autism. And I got a job working with him. I didn't know much about autism at the time, except what I read in books, but I knew about working with people with disabilities, and I was keen and open, and then I got started. So what was Michael like? Well, one thing that you should know about Michael is that he had difficulty with speech. In fact, he had no verbal language whatsoever. He could let me know a few things that he wanted by signing, by going walk or cheese or home. But for the most part, the only way he could let me know what he wanted was by taking my hand and pulling me over to what he wanted. He wasn't even able to point to what he wanted with his hands or with his eyes to look at what he wanted, to say, over here, this is what I need. So Michael had an extreme difficulty with communication, both verbal communication and nonverbal, and the back and forth of conversation, of course. And those are hallmarks of autism, these two difficulties. There was also something else that was rather special about Michael, which was how he shared, or his difficulties with sharing about his experience. You know, most of the time, when even a young child is excited about something, what do when they see something? They scream, look, and they point to what they want to share with you. And why do they do that? Because they want to bring you into their experience. And Michael wasn't able to do this. He wasn't able to connect with us in an emotional way in terms of the back and forth, what we call the reciprocal nature of social and emotional connection. Right? He certainly had an impact in our lives, and many people cared about him, but there wasn't that fluid back and forth that's so important for developing peer relationships. And that's a third hallmark of autism, which is difficulties with establishing or maintaining a friendship or a relationship with your peers. Now, this is not including people who love you from your family, for example, and Michael had many people who loved him and who impacted his lives from his family. And it wasn't about us as staff. You know, I really cared for Michael, and so did the other staff. We considered him an important part of our lives. I once asked Michael's mother about his friends at school, though. And her response was that Michael was the most popular child at school, or kid at school. Everybody knew his name, everybody waved at him when he came in, but nobody ever invited him to a birthday party. Nobody ever wanted to get together with him or was able to get together with him after school. And while that might be an extreme case, and many people with autism have friendships and develop relationships that are with peers that are meaningful, for example. But Michael's is an extreme example of really living on the outskirts of those typical peer social relationships. There was something else very special about Michael, and that was that he loved to walk. I mean, when I mean he loved to walk, it was a really intense interest of his. We would walk for hours every day in the heat, in the cold, in the snow. We would wear out our shoes walking. I once even clocked that we walked for 40 hours in 1 week. Now, there's some payoff to walking like this. We were in great shape. But there's also a lot of difficulties with this kind of intense interest when you can't engage in it, when it was too stormy out, or he wasn't able to go outside. And it's this kind of intense interest that's a hallmark of many people with autism. Another thing that Michael liked to do when he was going for his walks is he liked to eat leaves. And I don't mean tasting a leaf here and a leaf there. I mean grabbing a bushel of leaves, a handful of leaves, and eating them fully as often as he could. It was an intense ritual that he had to engage in when he was going for his walks. Sometimes, even when he was very upset, he would engage in it more than others. Sometimes he would also eat cigarette butts or coins or anything else he could get his hand on. And I know this was a ritual and a sensory issue as well for two reasons. The first was that once I got very frustrated with him for eating so many leaves. So I took a handful of leaves and I put it on a plate. And I took that plate and I put it inside for dinner next to his plate of lasagna, which is what he was going to eat for dinner that night. And he looked at the plate of leaves and he looked at the plate of lasagna, and he didn't want to touch the leaves at all. He knew that leaves were for outside. That was for what I did outside. But in here, it's lasagna time, right? It wasn't that he liked the taste of leaves. The sensory bit is also something, so I want to say that intense interest, or that intense interest in walking, was also coupled with a need or a compulsion, a ritual of having to do something. There was also a sensory aspect to this, which was having to mouth something, having to keep something in his mouth, because we figured out that if he put a pencil in his mouth and he was chewing on that while we were walking, he didn't want to eat as many leaves. Right? Every once in a while, it would still happen. Or if I tried to block him from eating the leaves, sometimes he would take my thumb and put that in his mouth really quickly, as if he still had to get something into his mouth. So a sensory issue, an oral sensory issue. And many people with autism have some sensory difficulties, whether it's with sights or sounds or smells or tastes or feels or touch. But it's important that you know that everybody with autism is unique. You know, Michael's story is just that. It's Michael's story. Right? We like to say that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Autism is also a spectrum. Right? And what we mean by a spectrum, now it's called autism spectrum disorder, is that these traits of social communication difficulties, these traits of being intensely interested in something or highly focused or having sensory issues, varies in terms of how severe they are. It varies in terms of how impairing it is. It also looks very different from one person to another. You know, we all share some of these traits. As a researcher, it's a good thing that I have the trait of being very detail-oriented, being very focused. Some people would say obsessed with my research. But I'm able to take that obsession and channel it in a very functional way. And when I need to turn it off and do something else with my life, I'm able to do that too. Right? So it's not a disorder just because I have this intense interest. So one question that we often look at is whether on this spectrum it's causing somebody an issue. Is it a difficulty that's taking away from their quality of life, from something that's important to them? It's also important that you know that although I talked about things that Michael had difficulty with, Michael also had tremendous ability. And I like to say that from disability, if we see the abilities within people, we can also establish opportunities for them. You know, Michael, because he was so ritual-based and able to be focused, worked very well at school in the library, able to help putting books away, able to do things that had a step A, B, and C. For him, that was a possibility. That was an opportunity for something that he could do that would be meaningful in his community. I want to end with this quote by Ralph McTell and his song, Michael in the Garden. He says, "And they in their wisdom say, Michael's got something wrong with his mind. They've seen the signs, but they can't see what Michael sees." And I think that's an important thing to take away from this because, you know, I talked a lot about Michael's story, but Michael had a gift. He contributed to my life. He helped me see things differently. He helped me see through his eyes. Now I'm able to appreciate people's difficulties and their differences for just that, for what they are. It's more than even acceptance. I grew to love Michael for who he was. And in fact, Michael's gift to me was that I'm here talking with you today. If it wasn't for those walks side by side in silence that we took, I would have never looked at Michael. I would have never thought to myself, I need to help you, Michael, in a different way. What else can I do? And it was through those kinds of questions that I made the decision to become a psychologist, to continue on in researching in this field. And it inspires me to keep doing my work and to teach like I'm doing with you. So a special thank you to Michael for putting me on this path, for making such a difference in my life, and a thank you to you as well for listening to his story.